What gets better results, solo maining or picking up multiple characters? Well, like I always seem to do for some reason, I thought it would be a fun idea to look back at the biggest tournaments throughout the history of the Smash Bros. Franchise so we can see what has been a more successful approach to winning, sticking with a single character that you've put your all into, or having a secondary or pocket pick ready for certain matchups, or just because you like playing multiple characters. I think any person who has wanted to get really good at Smash or just enjoys the game a lot has thought to themselves at some point, should I spend all my time on my single character, or is having a secondary character really more beneficial? As someone who has competed or tried to climb in higher ranks at a variety of games, not just Smash or even fighting games, I also wanted to contextualize my thoughts on the topic for anyone who's getting into competitive games after we see the results. Depending on where you are in terms of skill, enjoyment of the game, or how much you've been trying to min-max your chances of winning a tournament, the best approach for you will likely change depending on your context. But it is fun to check the history books to see what's been working for the champions of the past anyway. So let's do that first. Now, it's impossible to truly know how much time and effort a person puts into their secondary characters, and I also wish I had a hyperbolic time chamber so I could go back and check every single one of these tournaments individually to see how important the use of secondary characters really were. But unfortunately, that would take a year. So while looking over literally every single major that has taken place in Smash history, if a person won the tournament without ever pulling out a secondary character, we'll check it off for a win for the solo mains. And if the winner has had multiple characters listed, we will check it off as a winner for the multi-character specialists. While we're at it, I'll talk about a few fun facts along the way, such as which characters seem to be the most oftenly used as a secondary or which solo mains really put in work. So let's get started, but as is tradition on this channel, let's test your Smash IQ first, or just your ability to guess. Let me know which method you think will be more successful and why. There are very strong points on both ends as to whether or not picking up secondaries or co-maining characters is worth it or not, so I'm really curious to see what you guys think is the more valuable benefit and why. And let's start with Smash 64. One interesting thing with Smash 64, when I looked through the results for many years early into the game, solo maining was just absolutely dominating. All the way up to mid-2015, there were only 3 majors won by someone who used a secondary character at the tournament, and all of them were Super Boom fan. Other players would join this list with him, such as Gerson, Alvin, Kyoshiki, and Isaiah. But trust me when I say that without Super Boom, this list probably would not have been very close, because much of the tallies in the multi-character specialist area were because of this man. Either way, that being said, by the end of the list, it was actually really close. We had 44 majors won by a solo main and 39 won by someone who used multiple characters. This means 53% of majors were won by solo mains. This is a very close race that was dominated by solo mains early on, but I think it's safe to say that both solo maining and multi-maining has shown to be incredibly successful in Smash 64. And let's move on and check Melee. In my mind, before even starting this video, Melee always seemed like a game where the best of the best players really tried to master their top tier of choice, so I was expecting this to be a little one-sided. But let's see if I was right. As you probably know, Melee has a lot of major tournaments played throughout its life. So let's take a look throughout its history. The most interesting part of these results for Melee that I found quite funny as I went through them was that a lot of the results came in batches. When a player like Ken, Hungrybox, or Zane are dominating, I would just check off so many solo main wins in a row. When someone like Mewtwo King, Armada, or Mango were on their A game, I was non-stop checking off wins for the duo mains. Although even in these cases, these guys also had wins where they played a single character sometimes, but they won way more often when they were using multiple characters. Either way though, there were 212 majors played at the time I'm recording, and we had 127 wins for the solo mains and 85 wins for the duo mains. This means that while solo mains had 60% of all the majors, this is still quite a bit closer than I was expecting. It still is a very close race, and both sides of this coin have been extremely successful at different times. Who knows, if Armada kept playing, maybe even the multi-character specialist would have been in the lead right now. But as of right now, 60% of the tournaments have been won by solo mains, and let's go on to Brawl. Just quickly before we do that though, I would like to say I would really appreciate if you'd consider subscribing if you're enjoying the content. I won't give you a whole YouTuber spiel, but I really want to make more videos that I could dedicate more time to, and subscribing really does help. Plus, we're so close to 20k, and that would put a big smile on my face, so thank you, I appreciate all of you. Anyway, let's move on to Super Smash Bros. Brawl. As with any video regarding Smash history, I need to put the disclaimer at the start of this section that Meta Knight was really good. But if you think about it, does that mean that people were just solo maining Meta Knight and winning every tournament? Or did people choose their own favorite characters first and then pick up a pocket Meta Knight for the Meta Knight matchup? Well, I'm not going to drag it out because there actually haven't been that many Brawl majors overall. Out of the 43 top level majors played throughout Brawl history, 35 of them have been won by a solo main. That being said, not all of them are actually Meta Knight mains. To be honest, I actually think this is pretty impressive because in my mind, when someone who doesn't actually main Meta Knight won a really stacked tournament, I always kind of assumed they had a pocket Meta Knight, which definitely did happen sometimes, but many people won while using their solo main who wasn't Meta Knight and no one else, such as Larry Lur's Falco, Gluto's Wario, ADHD's Diddy Kong, and a few others. Funnily enough though, out of the 8 times the multi-mains won, every single time Meta Knight was one of the characters used in that multi-main run, except for 686M's win at Super Smash Con 2023, now known as Supernova, where he played Ice Climbers and Peach only. There honestly isn't that much more to say for Brawl. The most surprising thing to me is actually how many of the people who won with the solo main actually did so without Meta Knight. As I said, I think that's pretty impressive. I can't imagine going through an entire bracket against that guy while using Wario or something. Not that Wario was bad in Brawl, he was actually pretty good, but I actually used to play him quite a bit and I did not enjoy fighting Meta Knight, and I imagine you go through that matchup a lot at any Brawl major. That being said, Gluto continues to do the same thing to this day with Smash Ultimate's Wario, and he wins tournaments against Steve, so what a beast. So yeah, in the biggest gap we've seen so far, that leaves us at 81% of majors being won by solo mains in Brawl. This is 3 wins in a row for the solo mains, but I truly don't think the first 2 mattered that much. It was quite clear that both approaches were yielding great results depending on the players that were doing well during that time. In Brawl, however, it does seem like your best bet was just mastering one character. I'd imagine the best strategy was probably just to master Meta Knight as best you can, or figure out every single nuance that your character could do in the Meta Knight matchup instead. Now, there's something very interesting about these next 2 games that I want to bring up. Smash 4 and Ultimate following it kind of started 3 trends that could very well change people's approaches at maining characters. First of all, it introduced somewhat frequent balance patches throughout the game's life. If someone was to main a great character who gets nerfed, it might entice them to learn a secondary character, but as long as the original character remains pretty good, they might just end up using both. In that same vein, it was also the first game that was adding new DLC characters throughout the game's life. In a world where these DLC characters ended up being incredibly strong, yeah, that's this world, by the way, people may pick up these new top tiers, but still use their old characters from time to time as well, which also did happen quite a bit. Lastly, these games just had massive rosters. A lot of people have different approaches at tackling large rosters, which is actually what got me interested in looking in this video in the first place. To some people, it is next to impossible to have good matchups across the board unless your character is just turbo broken. But as we mentioned, they were adding balance patches, so chances are that wouldn't last very long. Assuming they actually continue to balance the game after they drop these lethal nukes on us, but you know. But yeah, because of this, some people think that picking up a secondary character to use for some of your tricky matchups is ideal. But on the other hand, some people do the opposite and they just brute force their way into learning the nuance of all their bad matchups. And these people seem to be successful in these games as well. So yeah, even though there is no definitive answer as to what is more optimal, I would imagine that more people are just willing to consider it when the game has DLC characters and balance patches and bigger rosters. Even besides all these reasons for actual competition that I mentioned, the bigger the roster, the more characters there are to just fall in love with, right? And some people will just learn new characters because they enjoy them, even at the highest levels. With all this being said though, Smash 4 actually shows us more of the same. Well, not Brawl, the stuff before that. Out of the 75 majors in Smash 4, 40 of them were won by solo mains and 35 were won by people who used multiple characters. This is almost an identical result to Smash 64. In both cases, the solo mains won slightly more often, 53.3% in Smash 4 compared to 53.01% in Smash 64. But yeah, it was an extremely tight race in both cases. The interesting part of Smash 4 is that the 2 characters who were considered to be the best of the best in Cloud and Bayonetta actually did not win that many majors as solo mains, especially Cloud. If you've seen my last video on which character won the most majors for every game, I won't spoil it because you can go check it out if you'd like, but I will tell you that Cloud finished extremely high up in Smash 4. But did you know that literally 0 of Cloud's wins were as a solo main? Every single time he won, he was accompanied by secondaries or he was a secondary himself, which is pretty crazy. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where people just like the character. He was also easy and strong, so people may pick him up alongside their current mains. And yeah, it's not that surprising, but the fact that there were 0 solo Clouds that won a major is pretty crazy. But yeah, for both Cloud and Bayo, a huge chunk of the results came from people who picked them up as secondaries or still use their old characters as secondaries as well. So even though these DLC characters were extremely strong, they were also accompanied by secondaries quite often. The character that won the most majors as a solo main by far was actually Diddy Kong. And yeah, with Smash 4 wrapped up, we have another win for the solo mains, but once again, it's so close in this regard that it could have changed with just a few majors. So let's move on to the game that has almost reached 200 majors already, despite being the newest one in the franchise, and that is Smash Ultimate. The most interesting part of Smash Ultimate is honestly the variety. I don't want to go into too many details because, as I've mentioned, I've made videos about which characters have and have not won, but Smash Ultimate has a very diverse pool of characters that do well at these majors. Just in this stretch of 10 majors alone, you can see 13 different characters that were used. Obviously, this was a particular diverse set of tournaments, and it's not just like you can go find 10 tournaments and they'll all look like this, but it's still pretty crazy to see how many characters actually get represented at the top. That being said, just like any other game, sometimes you have stretches of a few people just dominating and their character just shows up over and over as well though. But yeah, overall, this was easily the most diverse group of majors to look at. Not even necessarily the amount of characters that show up as well, but also how often some individual people show up with new secondaries or mains. There were times where players like MKLeo, Tweak, or Zachary will show up as a major winner within a few months of their last appearance and have an entirely new roster of characters lined up. So yeah, the overall diversity of Smash Ultimate was actually really interesting to look through. I would actually love to make a more focused video about this one day, about how often some of the best players change characters and continue to do well with so many different characters. But for now, let's focus on how Ultimate fared in terms of the success of the solo mains versus the multi-character specialists. And who would have guessed, it's quite close again. But for the very first time, more tournaments have been won by people who use multiple characters, and that happened 102 times so far in Smash Ultimate's life. Very closely keeping up, we have solo mains sitting at 90 wins, and funny enough, the last two majors were both won by solo mains in Gluto's Wario and Asimo's Ryu. Both these guys are character specialists who play characters that people do not consider to be top tier, but they have mastered them to a degree where they can keep up with the Steves and the Sonics of the world, and they probably know those matchups better than those players know the Wario or Ryu matchup, which is pretty cool. It's worth noting that by the time this video releases, I imagine Delta number 10 will probably have finished, so we could add another tally for whoever wins that event, but I'm recording this a little bit before that tournament starts. Either way though, solo mains have won 47% of the majors in Smash Ultimate, while 53% of the majors were won by people who used multiple characters during them. Besides the one obvious outlier in Brawl, I think we've learned one very clear thing. There are multiple paths to success in Smash Bros. You can argue that solo maining does look like the better of the two, and honestly it might be. But given how these numbers can change so much depending on what the best player at the time is picking or how close it always seems to be between the games, I truly believe it is just up to the player's skill set rather than one of these strategies being specifically better than the other. I know that's not the sexiest answer to be honest, but I am kind of happy that it happened this way. I have personally been someone who always struggled to stick to one character, mostly just because I get bored very quickly. But I always had the thought in the back of my mind that it was a disadvantageous trait to have. And hey, maybe it actually is, but right now from what I've seen, I think the player's skill is just a much bigger factor. I've always thought that if you ever get burnt out or just feel like picking up a new character, if it keeps you playing the game more, then it probably can't hurt. If you've ever played any competitive game, I'm sure you've experienced times where you pick up a new character and you notice that you are just fundamentally so much better at the game as a whole, even though you're on a new character. I think even if you're playing multiple characters and you're trying out new things, the skills you learn just by playing the game and the things you learn about the other characters and the nuances of different matchups, I think it will translate even if you end up picking one single character later down the line. And again, like I said, if it keeps you playing the game more, it's probably a benefit. That being said, if you're not like me and you have no problem sticking to one character and just grinding it out, it looks like you have a slight advantage so far in most of these Smash games except Ultimate, but again, that could change any day now. And I'm glad that the overall results were fairly close to show that as well. So yeah, just to wrap it up, we went over 608 majors throughout the history of all these Smash titles, and we have 339 of them being won by solo mains and 269 of them won by people who made multiple characters. This leaves us at a total overall of 56% for the solo mains and 44% for the multiple character players. Again, really close even across the entire history. Either way though, let me know what you think. Do you think this difference is significant? Do you truly believe that one strategy is objectively better than the other? And how many characters do you tend to play in different competitive games? I really do read every comment and I love hearing from you guys. If you have any other videos you'd like to see regarding Smash, fighting games, or pretty much anything, let me know and I'd love to get working on it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay beautiful, my friends.